This looks like a regular walking trail in northern Arizona, but at least 10 people died on it. It was a railroad for 78 years, and for most of them, it was known across the country as one of the most dangerous in America. 6 of the dead went in one explosion in one morning before the line had carried a single train. All of it comes out of the ground. This is where the Colorado Plateau ends, and northern Arizona falls away toward the desert, 1,600 feet in 18 miles. A railroad coming through here in 1881 had to get down that step, and it had 2 choices. It could swing miles south and pay for the detour, or it could go straight down a canyon and tunnel through the basalt at the bottom. It went down the canyon. It cut 328 feet of tunnel, the only bore its builders ever had to cut between Albuquerque and the Colorado River, and then it spent the rest of its life paying for the decision. This is the story of Johnson Canyon in Coconino County, Arizona, and of the December in 1960 when the Santa Fe Railway abandoned a tunnel that was in perfect working order and built itself a new railroad across open ground rather than send one more train down here. Follow along and I'll show you what is still up there. The contract went to a man named James T. Sims in the spring of 1881, and on paper, it was a few months of digging. Start with why a railroad was out here at all. In 1866, Congress authorized a transcontinental route along the 35th parallel, and the company chartered to build it was the Atlantic and Pacific. By 1881, its crews were working west across northern Arizona, and they had arrived at the edge of that step. Williams sits at about 6,750 feet. Ash Fork, 18 miles west, sits at about 5,150. There is no gentle way between them. The canyon was the cheap answer, and taking it committed the Atlantic and Pacific to something the company had managed to avoid for more than 1,000 miles of construction. All the way from Albuquerque to the Colorado River, across 2 territories, they had never once had to drill through a mountain. Here they did. Sims took the contract for all the work through the canyon, and by April, his grading crews were in. The pay was decent for the time and the place. $2.40 a day for laborers, $2.80 for the men drilling and the heading. Then they started cutting, and they hit malpays. Malpays is the local name for basalt, and this canyon has a core of it. Hand drills and black powder are how you take rock apart in 1881, and for close to a year, hand drills and black powder barely touched it. The railroad eventually hauled in a steam-powered drill to finish the job. Think about that for a second. A year of work, and a machine brought in from somewhere else to open a hole shorter than a city block. The money says the same thing in a different language. Ordinary mainline construction across Arizona ran about $10,000 a mile. One account puts the cost through this canyon at $75,000. I'll be straight about that number. It comes from a single account, and I could not find a second one that agrees on a figure, so take the exact dollars lightly and the multiple seriously. Whatever the true number was, the company was paying several times what railroad was supposed to cost, and it kept paying because the alternative was worse. They paid in men as well. On a warm August day in 1881, a crew was tamping blasting powder into drill holes in the heading. Something set the charge off early, and the early charge set off the powder stockpiled nearby. The blast came out of the bore the way a shell comes out of a gun barrel. The official toll was 6 men. One body was found later in the top of a tree down in the canyon, which is the kind of detail that never reaches a construction ledger and tells you more than the ledger does. The part I keep coming back to is the wording. The accounts of that morning say, "The men vanished." That was the honest description, and it stayed the description, because nobody was going down into the canyon to sort out what had come apart. Here is the detail that tells you what kind of place this was. On the flat ground above the cut, a town appeared. They called it Sims, after the contractor, and at its peak, it held somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 workers, which made it bigger than Williams. 2 general stores, at least 3 saloons. A stagecoach ran up from Prescott, 75 miles south, which was also where you went if you needed a doctor. One account says the place had everything except a church and a jail, and while that line only turns up in a single source, nothing else about the town argues with it. At the end of January in 1882, a drifter named James Casey and a railroad employee named William Ryan spent an evening drinking in one of those saloons. They walked out together on apparently friendly terms. Outside, Casey pulled a revolver and shot Ryan twice, once through the head and once through the neck, and Ryan died where he stood. Casey ran for another saloon, barricaded himself inside with a shotgun, and dared the camp to come and get him. The camp came and got him. A round from one of their guns killed him in there. The Prescott paper carried it in February, and the line I have not been able to put down since is the one about the funerals. Both men were buried on the Thursday. Ryan, the paper said, with many to mourn his sudden taking away. Casey, without a friend. By the end of 1882, the trains were running and Sims was a ghost town. The people went where the work went, which is what railroad towns do, and the main reason anyone knows the place existed is that some of them are still buried up there. Quick note, if you are getting something out of this, the best thing you can do is watch it through or hit subscribe. That is it. Back to the canyon. So the railroad had its hole through the mountain. Now it had to run trains through it, and this is where the canyon earned the reputation that outlived it. The Atlantic and Pacific did not get to keep it for long. The company went into receivership in 1894, and in June of 1897, its western division was sold at foreclosure to the Santa Fe Pacific Railroad, a company the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe had just created to hold it. Santa Fe is the name on this line for the rest of the story. Going east, out of Ash Fork and up toward Williams, was a climb that freight trains could not make alone. They called for helper engines, extra locomotives coupled on at the bottom to push, and the accounts differ on whether that meant two of them or several. Going west, the same grade became the opposite problem. A loaded train coming down had to hold itself back through the curves. And holding a 19th century train back on a grade means brakes. And brakes mean heat and wear and the occasional failure. Trains came off the rails here repeatedly. Pieces of them are still in the creek bed 200 feet below the grade, which is where they landed. No single famous wreck did it. Decades of ordinary ones gave this canyon a national reputation as one of the most dangerous railroad lines in America. Then there was the tunnel itself, which the railroad had lined with wood. A timber-lined tunnel full of coal-burning steam locomotives is exactly as flammable as it sounds. In January of 1898, the timbers caught. The fire took hold inside the bore and burned until it looked like it was burning itself out. And when it did, about 50 men went in to deal with what was left. The charred roof timbers chose that moment to give way. 2 men were killed under the collapse and 9 were seriously hurt. The line closed for 11 days. Then it reopened, and about a day later the fire came back, either as a new one or as the old one that had never fully gone out. That one killed again. Between the two of them, the Santa Fe was shut down across northern Arizona for the better part of a month and had to run its traffic over Southern Pacific rails to move anything through the state at all. What came out of that fire is still in there. The railroad sheathed the roof and the walls of the bore in riveted iron plate, so that the next time something burned, it would not be the structure holding the mountain up. After the First World War, they went back in and lowered the floor to clear the taller and wider equipment the country had started running. And in the early 1910s, the Santa Fe did the thing that tells you what it actually thought of this place. It built a second main track north of the canyon on easier ground for one reason, to get a better grade than the one it already had. After that, the two lines worked as a pair, and they worked directionally. Everything climbing east went around on the new line. Everything running west came down through the canyon and through the tunnel, coasting. So for the last half century of its life, this railroad only ever carried traffic in one direction, downhill. And the country was about to hand it the most important freight it would ever move. By 1942, there were armed men living on top of the tunnel. Johnson Canyon had become a choke point on a transcontinental line moving troops and war freight west toward the Pacific, and the tunnel was the narrowest thing on it. One newspaper account says it was guarded around the clock. The accounts disagree about who was doing the guarding, Army soldiers or railroad watchmen, and one of them describes a gun emplacement built over the bore itself. What nobody disagrees about is that somebody put up a wooden guard post above the west portal and put a man in it through the winters. Sit with the arithmetic of that. In 1942, the United States government looked at this canyon and decided that a hole in the ground in northern Arizona was worth stationing armed men over indefinitely on the theory that losing it would hurt the war effort. 18 years later, the railroad walked away from it. Now, here is the part that makes this different from most dead railroads in America. When the Santa Fe stopped using Johnson Canyon, everything in it was in working order. If you had asked me before this project why the line died, I would have guessed the death toll, and I would have been wrong. The wrecks and the fires and the men in the graveyard had nothing to do with the decision. What killed Johnson Canyon was a set of numbers on a drawing board. The numbers were these. The canyon forced curves sharp enough to make a train fight the track every foot of the way, and a climb that eastbound freight had needed help with since 1882. The bore was too tight for the high and wide loads American railroads were increasingly being paid to move, so anything oversized had to be sent around it. And the whole arrangement cost money to maintain in a canyon, at altitude, on rock that had been trying to shed itself onto the tracks for 70 years. So the Santa Fe put $22 million against the problem and drew a new railroad on open prairie a few miles north. 44 miles of double track running from Williams Junction west to Crookton, built to lower the grade and take the curves out of it. One cut on that line runs 2 miles long and 115 feet deep. It is called the Crookton Line Change, and it opened in December of 1960. That is the month the canyon died. There was no accident and no closure order. Steam was already finished on the Santa Fe by then. The last of it retired from revenue service in 1957, and long gone from this line before that. There was simply a new railroad. It was better, and the trains went that way instead. Then the crews came through and took the old one apart behind them. The rails came up, and the trestles came down. What they left standing was the one thing that had cost the most to build and would have cost the most to remove. Here's what is actually up there now. You come off Interstate 40 at exit 151 west of Williams onto Forest Road 6, and you drive north toward the site of Welch Station. The first couple of miles are ordinary dirt. After that, the road wants high clearance, and at a certain point, the rock in the way makes the decision for you, and you walk. From Welch, it is about 2.5 miles east along the old grade to the tunnel, so call it 6 miles on foot for the round trip. It is nearly flat the whole way because it was built for trains. Up on the flat where the town of Sims stood, one headstone is still standing. One out of everyone that place put in the ground. Welch Station is a concrete slab and a foundation in the grass. The grade underfoot is loose cinder, the ballast the Santa Fe used out here, and people still find hardware lying on it. Cut spikes, the occasional splice bar, the piece of steel that used to bolt one rail to the next. Down the slope on your right, in the pines along the creek, there are heavy timbers off the trestles and at least one set of rail car wheels that has been sitting there since whichever wreck put it there. And then the canyon closes in, and the tunnel is in front of you. Both ends are open, so you can stand at the west portal and see daylight at the other end, 328 feet away. You do not need a light to walk through it. The portals are stone masonry, cut and laid by men earning $2 and change a day, and they are square and tight and holding. Inside, the riveted iron plate from after the fire is still overhead and still on the walls, and over the top of that, there is a coat of sprayed concrete from a later repair. 3 generations of somebody trying to keep this hole open, stacked one on the next, every layer still in place, with nothing running through any of it. Above the west portal, up in the loose rock, there is what is left of the guard post. It is barely visible now. One thing to be straight about: most of the grade sits on the Kaibab National Forest, and at least one local trail group says the tunnel and the ground immediately around it are privately owned. People walk to it constantly, and it appears in every trail guide for this part of Arizona. That is the situation as it actually stands, and you can decide what to do with it. Count the generations of travel stacked in this corridor, and you get 5. Beale's Wagon Road came through this country in 1857 and stayed in use until the railroad arrived. The Atlantic and Pacific laid its line down this canyon in 1882. Route 66 was a line through Williams and Ash Fork in 1926. The Santa Fe moved onto the prairie in 1960, and the interstate came through last of all, taking Williams in October of 1984, the final town on the whole of Route 66 to be bypassed. Every one of those 5 is still there to be found, and the 2 that are still working are the loudest. The BNSF Transcontinental Main Line runs a few miles north of where you are standing, on the alignment that replaced this one, and it is one of the busiest freight railroads in North America. Interstate 40 runs a couple of miles south. You are in the canyon that used to be the only way through, and you can hear both of them from the tunnel mouth. 78 years of service, at least 10 dead. A tunnel that took a year and an imported steam drill to cut through basalt, and cost the railroad several times what railroad was supposed to cost. It survived 2 fires and an unknown number of derailments. It was guarded with rifles when the country decided it mattered, and it was abandoned 18 years later by men who had found a smoother piece of ground a few miles north. The tunnel never failed. The reason for the tunnel failed, and the tunnel just stayed where it was. If your father or your grandfather worked the Santa Fe out of Ash Fork or Williams, tell me in the comments what he said about the canyon.